Hello, my name is Thomas, and this is the Musician's Health video series slash podcast. I created this resource in order to promote the well-being of musicians, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I hope you're able to gain some insight and enjoy. So, I would love if you could just start off talking a little bit about what it is that you do and your background and history and how you got interested just in performance health in general.
Okay. Well, I'm Lea Pearson. I am a licensed body mapping educator, doctor of flute performance. I call myself an injury prevention specialist. I'm also a certified health coach and the founder of Music Minus Pain. What I do is I help musicians recover their ability to play with joy and ease. And it might be somebody who just has a lot of tension and they're not sure where it comes from and they're not sure what to do about it, but they know it's getting in their way, some kind of physical limitation. It might be people who are actually injured, who have a tendonitis, or people who have really sore backs or sore necks. It might be somebody with a serious injury, but where the approach that I come from, which is through body mapping, which I can tell you a little bit more about later, is that our whole instruments are the body. The body is the instrument. So this is our whole instrument. This thing out here that we play is just a small part of what we do. And so tuning into how we're using our bodies while we play, while we practice and perform is incredibly important, because if we don't know how we're moving, we don't know how we're creating sound. Movement creates sound. Mm. And I come to this from my own self. I played in pain for 30 years. It took me that long to figure out what was going on and realizing that it wasn't my fault. I just had never been taught. But I love to look at the big perspective. I have quite a holistic background in education reform, so I'm really interested in pedagogy. I study the Dalcroze technique and eurythmics, which is all about learning music with your body. I have a background in psychology and in education and health coaching and everything that has to do with how it all works together, how not just the technique of how you play your instrument.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned a little bit, you touched upon body mapping. Can you talk about what that is and how you implement that into your work?
Right. Well, the term comes from Barbara Conable, who was an Alexander Technique teacher, who basically saved the careers of hundreds of musicians. And she was not a musician herself, but she realized that we need to have musicians helping other people learn about their bodies. And what she and her former husband discovered was that it's the way we think about our body that makes a difference in how we use it. We actually have maps in the brain. That's where the mapping term comes from. And just the really simple example of how Bill Conable figured this out is that he was a cello teacher at Ohio State, and the violin teacher came in and said, "Can you help me with my student? She's having trouble with her bow arm. I can't figure out. I can't help her." So she came in and she played, and Bill watched her play for a minute. And he was also an Alexander Technique teacher, so he'd been doing this for a long time. And he asked her, he realized there was something wrong about the way she thought about her elbow. And he said, "Where's your elbow?" She said, "Up here." And he said, "No, it's not. It's down here." And she went, "Oh." And then she could bow just fine. Mm. So what happened was that because she started when she was so young, her elbow really was way up here when she was a little girl. And she had never changed that map to bring it down a few inches to where it actually was. And basically she was trying to bend her arm at a place where there was no joint. So this applies to all aspects of the way we use our bodies, how we think about our hands, how we think about where our head is connected to our spine, how we understand how the arms are put together and how they move, and how we think about our hip joints and our knee joints and our feet and all of that, and especially our breathing. Oh my goodness. There's so much confusion around breathing that people get really confused. They don't know what to believe anymore because there's so many different ideas out there. I once asked, I was doing a workshop for a group of music educators, basically band directors.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them, I said, what is support? And they went, diaphragm? It was like, they had no idea what it was or how to explain it. And here are these people teaching hundreds and hundreds of kids how to play wind and brass instruments.
Mm.
So there's a lot of confusion and sometimes misinformation out there. But what we do is try to get the most accurate, up-to-date information about, how the body works. That's why I have my buddy Bones here, so that we can look at it and figure out. Like, for example, when I was a mess, I did really play in pain for 30 years, and it was because my body map was so messed up. It was just all over the place, and I had no idea where the hip joint was and how the hip joint moved. My hip joints were basically locked for years. And then one summer I was at a children's museum in Maine, and they had a skeleton like this, full size, on a bicycle. And you could push the pedal, and I was watching it, the pedal going around and around, and went, oh my God, that's how the hip joint works. And I could actually see it in action. I was so off. It really was a mess.
It's so true though, because I think there's this notion that if you know about your body and know the bones and all the different parts of the anatomy, right, then you know how to move. But it's not really the case. You have to know or have to perceive how that movement is happening.
Yeah, you don't necessarily know. And there are all kinds of interesting ways that people, come up with getting body maps. But what's really important about it is that once the map is actually just a habit of thought. So we have lots of habits, that are part of us as we learn how to play, habits of movement and finger patterns and habits of how we think about ourselves. This is a habit of thought about our bodies, about movements. And once you change that habit, once I learned and could see how that hip joint worked, then I could move well. And it was like that. It was just very quick because I made that switch. Then I had to practice it. So you can make the switch real fast. Then, just like changing any habit, it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. You can't just stop biting your nails, in one day.
And I think it takes going back to basics. When we're born and when we're children and little toddlers even, the way that we walk and the way that we crawl is just, we don't know any other way. It's the most natural way, right? And then we learn all of these other ways, and it inhibits our natural movement.
Absolutely. So I often recommend people to hang around with little kids, and especially if you're lucky enough to have your own child or grandchild, get down on the floor and crawl with them and lie on your back and wiggle your arms and legs, or, discover. It's about recovering. For most people, it's simply about recovering their natural way of moving, which they had when they were little. Unless there was something organically wrong or some kind of disease or illness, most of us know how to move. And then we go to school and we sit in chairs for 8 hours a day for 12 years. And we lose a lot of that natural ability to move. So if you look at people who live in indigenous cultures where they don't have chairs and they don't sit around all day, and kids learn in a very active way, it's a totally different picture. It's one of the reasons why I love to teach squatting. When in cultures where people don't have chairs, they sit like this on the ground. And it's a very supported, natural way to sit. It gives you incredible breathing, really free breathing. And I really encourage people to try that when they're playing, if they can get down there. Not everybody can get down there.
Absolutely. I think I was doing that as I was taking body mapping lessons. I started doing that, and what helped me was having the exercise ball and being able to just dig a little bit deeper into that. And I found that sitting and practicing on that was a real game changer for me.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of people, I have a lot of bones here.
Yeah.
A lot of people discover when they go into a squat, and it totally opens up the pelvis, and then there's more room for the organs to move down when the diaphragm pushes all your organs down when you breathe, when you inhale. And so they end up getting a whole lot more air, and then they get support from the whole lower part of the body. And for most people, their sound just goes boom. It just opens up in this incredible wide core, really solid core of a sound, and like, whoa, I didn't know I could sound like that, if they're used to standing in a somewhat locked way.
And you got interested in this because you were playing with pain, but how has body mapping and Alexander technique work impacted other parts of your life that don't have to do with playing?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to make it clear I'm not an Alexander technique teacher. I did study it for 3 years. I went to many workshops until I was able to, I lived out in the sticks for a long time, in Michigan and Kentucky. When I finally decided to go back to school to get my doctorate at Ohio State, then I was in a city where I could actually study. And I had weekly Alexander technique lessons for 3 years. And that saved my life, because I was also in the middle of getting my doctorate and working and raising 2 small children. So it was like, that kept me alive. It is a lot of things that have changed. Just in the way I go about the world, I have so much more awareness. One of the things we have to train ourselves in as musicians is the quality of awareness. What are we paying attention to? Are we doing this, looking at the music stand and trying to block out the audience so we don't feel afraid? Or are we really open to all the senses, multi-sensory awareness? Are we really present? So one of the things that it's really helped me with is to learn how to be present, learn how to be awake and aware and alert in a good sense, not alert in a panicky sense. But that's what we want as musicians. We don't want to be off in some zoned out place. We want to be wide awake to what's going on with the conductor or the other musicians or our students or whatever. And I think, just a little aside here, this is one of the things that's killing us with online teaching, is that we spend so much time with our attention focused into this little box that we literally forget the rest of our bodies. And we forget the rest of the space around us.
Yeah.
And the reason that matters, because I want to know why, I really want to know why, is that this is important, the human body is designed to function best when we are connected to our environment, when we are aware with our eyes and our ears and our skin and our breathing, and we know where we are in space, because that's how we know how to survive. That's how we know where the predators are. If you're talking about living 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago, wherever you live, if you don't have that kind of awareness, you're dead meat. So it's a really powerful survival instinct that we have lost in our culture. And when you allow yourself to be awake and aware, and when you're playing or when you're doing anything else, it literally stimulates the reflexes that keep you upright. It literally allows your spine to be buoyant and upright and everything else to work. It allows your body to work better. So why don't we want that? We want that.
Absolutely.
There's not many people who teach that. It's not part of our music education.
And it's so interesting because it's something that impacts the sound very much and impacts just the way that we play. So I feel like it needs to be something that at least people have really good general knowledge about and can help students with in lessons or in a practice room or what have you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I always say you have to play with every cell of your body, all those billions of cells. The more of your body you play with, the better sound you get and the more flexibility and ease. And it's so wonderful. I'm working with teachers now. I have a teachers group on Facebook, and we talk a lot about how to do this, and especially in this era of having to teach into screens. And what they have to learn about how to take care of themselves then becomes something that they can do in a lesson and say, okay, we're going to just pause for a minute here. Let's see what we're noticing. Let's see what we're aware of. So while the teacher can be taking care of themselves, they can also help train their students to use that same kind of awareness as well.
And this is a group that you have, you're conducting on Facebook currently?
Yeah, it's a group of teachers who want to learn, first of all, how to teach better online, and then how to include more of this pedagogy of body mapping in their teaching, because it provides for more engagement. And that's the thing we really struggle with across the digital divide here, is how to engage our students and how so they don't feel that there's this block between us.
Mm-hmm.
That group is called the Teachers Circle. It's a membership group. Yeah, so you apply to get on, and there's a small monthly fee, but it's so exciting to see these teachers supporting each other and trying out new things. We'll learn something one week, and then they'll go back and practice it in their teaching, come back and talk about the successes they had. And I mean, even after 1 week, they're like, wow, I love this. I'm not used to asking so many questions of my students, but it really works. That's one of the things we talk about, is the process of inquiry. So I like to call it inquiry to prevent injury. The more you ask students about their experience, what they're noticing, what they're feeling, what they're hearing, the better they get at noticing and articulating that, and then making decisions about what works and what doesn't work for them. So instead of being a teacher where you come in and tell them what to do, it's like, oh, now I'm going to help them learn to teach themselves. I'm going to start asking them questions. What did you notice when you played that? Instead of saying, well, you know, when you played that, I thought I heard a little bit of a glitch here in measure 45. Like, what did you notice? What was your experience? And whatever they tell you, that's where you go from.
I see.
Because you're guided by what they need instead of you figuring out what you think they need. Start with what they need, and this is where my work in education reform came in, because I learned this early on, that people learn best with something that they're invested in.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of something that you're saying when you're talking about the student, or asking these questions in order for the student to gain the awareness. I think that that's crucial in this work, because every body is going to be different, right? And so the student needs to know how to assess their own individual self.
Yeah. And so you look at, for example, in the flute world, we basically have one size fits all instruments. I mean, there are little things that people are trying, and people are making more and more adaptations now, but you know, even with the piano. So you're basically having 5,000 different shapes and sizes of bodies and fingers and hands and spines and arms, length of arms, all this stuff, trying to play on the same instrument. So to try to tell them that they all should play the same way, it's just crazy. Because, you know, just the length of your arms can be different. The length of your fingers can be. I chopped off one end of my finger when I was 12, so my fingers fit differently on the keys than other people.
Yeah.
So we have to get really good at helping people understand how their bodies are reacting to the instrument. So one of the things I'll do a lot of work with people with is, when you get ready to play, you know, you pick up your instrument or you sit down at the piano, what do you do with your body? Are you just perfectly comfortable and at ease and starting to play, or you're like,
right away?
Lots of people who are tense and have injuries, they are tense before one note comes out of their mouth or their fingers. One note. And so if they're starting 3 hours of practice when they're already tense, it's a downhill slide from there. So we have to do that practicing a lot. Oh, look at that. The back of my neck just tightened up when I thought about playing. I didn't even pick up my instrument, just thought about playing, and I got tight. Oh, gee, I wonder, could I think about playing without tightening up my neck? Could I do that? Could I think about playing and keep my breathing free and easy? You know, and doing that 100 times, because we've done the other 1,000,000 times. The old habits we've done 1,000,000 times.
It's so interesting, because I resonate a lot with what you're saying. I think in the past it would be my neck strap. I would just put the neck strap on and just feel that tension, right? And then it progressed a little bit into, well, if I'm just going through my daily routine of prior to practicing, if I'm driving to the school or the church where I'm practicing, like, I would feel that tension arising, because I knew what was coming. I knew that I was going to need to be contorted into a certain position, you know?
Yeah. Did they ever teach you what actually supports the instrument? What supports the neck strap and what supports the instrument? Did
Meaning,
teachers ever tell you that?
I don't, meaning like what part of your body supports the
Yeah,
neck strap?
how does your body support the instrument? Yeah.
I was told that it's the shoulders that are going to be supporting your instrument, whereas it's, you know, people, there's a common misconception that it's the neck. Um,
Yeah.
but I still feel like a lot of people have that view, and so
Yeah.
you kind of feel
Yeah.
that
And the
forward.
neck strap actually exacerbate that because people do react. They allow the neck strap to push their head forward. So
Hmm.
I love the harnesses that people are wearing, but even the idea of the shoulders, it's not your shoulders that support the instrument.
Mm.
It's not. And so if you think that, then you're going to try to create tension in your shoulders. And a lot of people do with all the instruments that you have to pick up and hold. People think, when you ask a student, what do you think supports your instrument? They'll almost always say something like that. But it's really the whole spine and the feet. Just like when you wear a heavy backpack, you don't want to use your back muscles to hold it on. You want to let the weight go over your whole spine. So it's the same with the neck strap. It can work perfectly well if people learn that it's not trying to crick their neck or make their shoulders tense. It's just a matter of letting the weight go through your spine.
Mm-hmm.
And your feet, really, your feet are supporting your instrument.
And it's a very nuanced thing to allow in, right? And so I think when people hear this and they think about it, they think to themselves, oh, how do I even work on that? How do I get started of just creating that mindset?
Exactly. And you know, everything we do as musicians is nuanced. We have the most subtle movements of just about anybody. You know, some elite, we have the kind of subtle movements that elite athletes have in terms of small muscle movements, primarily, unless you're, you know, percussion or double bass. But the subtlety of movement that it takes, for example, to move a violin bow or to use an embouchure is just, you know, it's why it takes us so long to learn. It's incredibly refined. And that's why we want to teach people early on, you know, early in their studies, to notice what it feels like. Because if they start to notice, you know, at 10 that the neck strap hurts and you don't wait until they're 16, then you've got some feedback and you've got some information to work with. And it's really just a matter of asking questions and keep on asking questions. Lots of times, I think our pedagogy comes from, you know, the model where the teacher is the person who knows everything and the student is the powerless little, oh, feed me, you know, give me great information, oh, great teacher. It's not that way anymore, and it shouldn't be that way, because the teacher's job is to help the student become independent, just like a parent, you know. So the teacher has to be more of a facilitator and less of a knowledge imparter. Not that their knowledge isn't important or useful or worthwhile, it absolutely is, but you can find ways of feeding it to students in a way that really matters to them and that connects with what they want and need right now. You know, so I may see somebody that has terrible problems breathing, but that's not what they're worried about. They're worried that their wrist is, you know, falling apart. So we don't necessarily talk about breathing. I wait until we get some sense of normalcy around the arm and the wrist and the hand, and then they'll start to see how it affects their breathing and how what's going on with their breathing and the way they think about our body then affects the hand. And then we start to get deeper and deeper into everything.
Yeah, and this makes it so that that student can go on and teach in the same way that they were taught, and so it just becomes a lineage of just facilitating, right? So it's not like, this is what you need to do, this is the right and wrong way. Done.
Right. And we are a little behind compared to some other professions because we've had that apprentice model, you know, for so many hundreds of years. You'll do what the master says, and it's changing a lot now. I know a lot of teachers who are wonderful facilitators and create studios that are very supportive and very explorative, and they have balls in their studios and they do all kinds of fun stuff. But I'm on a mission to help change the way we teach, because I think it's so important. You know, I used to just work primarily with individual musicians, and lately I'm just I was like, I need to go up the chain and make more difference, make more of a difference and work with the people who are teaching our kids, because that's where it starts.
Absolutely. And that kind of pivots really well to your book, What Every Flute Teacher Needs to Know About the Body. So can you talk a little bit about that and how that came to?
Yeah. Well, when I was working on my doctorate at Ohio State, I was studying all this stuff, and it was about that time also that Barbara Conable started developing the course, What Every Musician Needs to Know About the Body. And that's an actual course with 6 different segments in it that everybody who's a licensed body mapping educator teaches in various ways. We all teach it differently. But I was like, I had the same passion that we have to give this information out to teachers. So the book is Body Mapping for Flute. It's what every flute teacher needs to know about the body. So this was, by the way, over 20 years ago, which is hard to believe at the moment, but still good knowledge. I put in a lot of teacher tips and things like that. So I wrote it as my doctoral thesis. And then I decided, I think I need to rewrite this for the general public. So I spent a whole summer rewriting it and then published it myself for several years, and finally got sick of mailing books. So I turned it over to GIA Music, which has published a lot of the body mapping books. And they edit it for me and put it in the format that it's in now. But it sold a lot of the flute studios, university flute studios in this country use it as a textbook, for their students, and they have, for 1 year, whenever, or they use some of the exercises, do a lot of those little exercises. I'm in the process of creating videos of all the little exercises in it. So every piece of information is tied to some physical thing that you can do, because I don't believe in just dumping information on people. I want them to experience it. And what the result is, what does it feel like? That's because that's how you learn. I happen to be a kinesthetic learner. I don't learn very well by reading.
Well, it's good that you are a body mapping professional and you're a kinesthetic learner. I think the two go hand in hand.
Not surprising, yeah.
That's great. You talked just briefly about the changing of pedagogy and the culture of pedagogy, and you're doing that right now, in your Facebook group, right? And what other ways are you trying to facilitate that change?
What are the ways that I'm trying to do? Well, a couple of things. I'm trying to get workshops out to people, whoever wants it. Like this morning I did a workshop for a music camp up in Toronto for some of their kids. So while I'm doing a workshop for the kids, these were young high school kids, the teachers also there learning and questioning and getting ideas. So that's a fantastic way, because the teacher always comes away with, wow, I didn't know that, or I'm going to try this, or we're going to get some new ideas. I'm also really exploring the whole connection between how we think and how we feel and how that affects the way we use our bodies. So just a really simple example, if I'm doing a workshop on this, think of something that you're worried about. So right now, anybody who's listening, think of something that you're worried about. Notice what happens to your body. Notice how you start to get a little bit tight. You go into this little pattern. It's just a version of the startled pattern. The bear jumps in the middle of the road and you do this. Well, we have any pattern of tension, a little tiny bit of that. So when that starts to creep in, unbeknownst to us because we're not aware of it, then all of a sudden, I don't breathe as well when I'm performing, or I had this at home, I could play it so well at home, and now I'm in my lesson, I can't play it as well as I could at home. These little tiny patterns of tension, and then how to change that. If you think of something that you love, or someone that you love, think about that as you're just sitting or standing wherever you are. How does that make your body feel? It's completely different. It's warm and soft and expansive and open. You can play that way. You can actually create that feeling. You can choose to put yourself in that state and feel that way when you play. And that's what I try to do whenever I'm performing. That I want to be in that state of warmth and ease and openness and love and comfort and loving my audience, loving the music that I play, loving what I'm doing, but in that really visceral way, not just, oh, I love music, I love to play, but really feeling it. So when I work with teachers, I really encourage them to help their students explore that as well, because I believe there's no such thing as the mind-body split. I call us beings. We are beings, and as beings, we are in certain different states. We can be in a state of anger and fury. We can be a state of sadness, but those are not just body states, and they're not just mind states or just emotional states. They are whole being states. And we have a whole lot of control, choice over what we do. So even if we've had a history of performance anxiety, yeah, we need to go in and deal with, especially if there's any kind of trauma. And many of us as musicians have had some kind of long-term trauma. It might be small, but it builds up. We have to do the counseling and the emotional work to start to undo that so we're not trapped by it. But we also have this choice at any given moment of saying, well, am I going to go into that, or am I going to choose to go into love? I can decide. I have power over that. I don't have to be a victim of my past. And we know a lot of people with performance anxiety and tension issues that aren't really taught that they can manage that in that way.
Oh, that's really well said. It makes me think of something that I read when you talk about thinking about certain things and then having those feelings associated with those things that you're thinking about and trying to implement those feelings into a performance. It makes me think of a part of Barbara's book that I read, What Every Musician Needs to Know About the Body. A part of that book, it talks about, forgive me if I'm wrong with this, but it talks about work. Talks about like performing and the feeling of work versus the feeling of tension versus the feeling of like artistic tension. So I think people when they associate those feelings with performing, it means that everything needs to be completely effortless and just totally exactly, yeah. But there is a kind of tension that goes with it, a healthier one, if I'm correct.
Well, I think I would describe it more in the sense that, what's the definition of tension? Well, it's usually muscles working against each other. What we need to know as musicians is what is the right amount of effort to create the we want. So, if I'm playing a high C fortissimo on the flute, I'm going to be putting a lot of work into moving that air and getting that sound. It takes a huge amount of effort to get that pitch vibrating at about 2,000 vibrations per second. Loud. But there are other things that take very little work at all. If I'm just playing a lullaby on the low range of my instrument, it takes very little work. So we always want to try to figure out, okay, we want to be efficient in the amount of work we do, and we want to find the appropriate amount of work that we need to create the sound we want, no more, no less. And we want that to be reliable. So that we know, no matter what performance situation we go into, if you're playing outside and the wind is blowing your music off, or you're in a concert hall and somebody bangs the door or starts talking or blowing bubble gum or whatever, or we're sick or whatever, we know exactly what we have to do with our bodies and minds and our whole being to create the sound we want. It's reliable and consistent. And you only get that by figuring it out and practicing it. So for me, that's the real work of practicing. It's not learning the notes. The real work is when I'm learning a piece, how do I train myself to notice when I'm doing extra work or when I'm not doing enough work, and what exactly do I need? And can be different for every note.
And it's so hard to listen to your body in that moment and be able to recognize, oh, this is all of a sudden really tense and not
Yeah.
what I want.
Yeah, it's because we're trained to focus on the music in front of us. That's why for a lot of people, memorizing can be really helpful. As they're learning, not that they have to memorize, but as they're learning the music, memorizing it enough or memorizing the hard passages so that they can really feel what's going on. I used to practice in my recliner. So the very most difficult parts, I would sit in my recliner without my instrument, with my music, thinking through the notes and feeling every movement that I had to make with my fingers, with my embouchure, with my breath, what emotions I want, really living that music, but totally in my imagination, so that I could feel how my body was responding. And I could tell instantly if I was working on a passage and one note, I would feel my whole body tense up. Not a lot, but I could feel that tension creeping in. And so I know, oh, that's where my brain isn't clear about the fingering. Now I'm going to go back and really slowly work through that fingering in my brain, in my thoughts. How do I coordinate those finger movements? Because if I can't think it, I can't play it. We think that if we can play it up to a metronome, we know it. But if it's not 100% there, if you can't do it every single time, your brain doesn't know it. So that's a wonderful way to practice, especially for people who are struggling with tension or injury, to actually put yourself in a relaxed position in a recliner or sitting on your bed with, propped up with pillows or whatever, so that you can start to feel, oh yeah, wow, isn't that interesting? I just tensed up for that passage. I could feel it in my neck, and I could feel it in my jaw, and I could feel it in my breathing. And then start to train yourself to undo that at really slow speed. So it is challenging, and it's the real work. Learning notes is a piece of cake compared to this stuff.
Like you said, it's a challenge and it's a lot of work, but I think it's so necessary because it's unrealistic to think that we're going to go into a performance and stay in the complete calm place of alignment the whole time. We're going to be flexing in and out, so we want to know what is like the center, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to practice recovering. So that's one of the things I work with people a lot. Okay, they learn a new way and it's like, oh my God, that feels so good. Oh, my sound is so amazing. I don't want to ever play the old way again. I'm like, no, you have to. First of all, you can do it because you've done it a million times. But second of all, you're going to slip back into that 100 times. And you have to know, first of all, how to notice it. Second of all, how to recover from it so you don't get stuck there. Because that's the old pattern of being tense and being stuck and not knowing how to get out of it. So we practice, okay, you get to that point. You want to know where that threshold is, where you go from feeling at ease to starting to feel tension. And then you work that threshold. You work, okay, how do I go from this note to that note without losing my contact from the ground, without getting tight, without, because it might just be a couple of notes, or it might be a bunch of notes. Depends on what you're working with. But you definitely want to practice recovering so that you know how to do that, because I guarantee you're going to go back into the old ways. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
Powerful habits.
You just talked about connection to the floor. Can you mention how that's relating to this kind of startle reflex or like fear response that you're talking about?
Yeah. So you want to do a little exercise?
I'm ready.
Okay. Stand up. Here. So we're going to stand up and we're just going to do 10 jumping. Everybody stand up. Jack here. We're going to do 10 jumping jacks. Are you ready? Here we go. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, now just stand there and feel your feet on the floor and feel how your body feels. Just notice your breathing. Notice how your neck and your shoulders feel, and notice the contact of the soles of your feet with the floor. So what do you notice, Thomas?
So I notice it feels like there's a balance between the heel and then the big toe and the pinky toe. Like it feels like I'm centered. You know, like I'm not like leaning more towards the heel or leaning towards forward. I feel kind of balanced.
So you're feeling balanced. How do you feel in terms of your relationship of the soles of your feet to the floor? Do they feel like they're really sinking into the floor, or they're pulled up off the floor?
Oh, they feel like they're sinking, like it feels very heavy.
Okay. And how does that affect your breathing and your ability to move your arms?
Well, I feel like it feels foundational, right? So it's like I feel like I have something to rely on, like while I'm doing all of these other movements and breathing.
Yeah. So that's the feeling of being grounded. Because here's the thing, we are supported by the ground. As much as gravity is holding us securely to the ground, there is a force, the opposite of gravity, that's coming up from the ground that's keeping us buoyant and upright. And when we're in balance, we trigger that sense, that reflex that keeps us buoyant and upright. Now let's do the opposite. Let's pretend that you're walking on ice, or if you've never walked on ice, maybe on mud. So see what that does to your body when you're thinking, if you're trying to pull your feet off the ground. How does that change how your body feels? You're afraid of really stepping into the ground.
It feels like my knees are locking up.
Yeah. And what's happening up here?
It's very still.
You start to go into that startled reflex. So what happened, the pattern is of this, your neck shortens, your shoulders come up and in, your arms come close to your body, your gut tightens, your legs pull up off the floor. That's the pattern, and your feet pull up off the floor. So anytime your feet are not completely sinking into the floor, the rest of your body is going to be in some version of a startled reflex. We have to have that, a sense of being completely supported by the earth. And sometimes it's hard to do when you're on the 25th floor of a building, you know. But you know the story about the initial skyscraper workers? How they worked? Well, when they first started building skyscrapers in New York, they couldn't find anybody who would, especially any white men, who would go up hundreds of feet in the air and stand on an I-beam. They just, are you kidding me? I'm not going up there. So there's a tribe of Native Americans in New York State that are cliff dwellers, and they knew how to walk on high places. So they brought them in, and incidentally, they still do a lot of this scaffolding work, the initial scaffolding of buildings, the same tribe. But many years later, a drama teacher in New York called them in because her students were having trouble adjusting to being on a high floor, and they asked them, "How did you do that? How do you do that? How do you stand on a 12-inch I-beam hundreds of feet above the ground?" And they said, when we're standing on that beam, we feel like we're standing on the ground. So they have that connection through the entire structure, all the way hundreds of feet down to Mother Earth. And when I'm teaching, when I'm on a mountain, I'm like, the whole mountain's holding you up. You are being held up by the ground. And it's so different from what we're taught about how to hold ourselves up. You know, we're constantly being told, keep yourself upright, be, you know, feel like a puppet where your head is being pulled up like this. And all of those, anything that you do that creates tension in your body is not going to help you as a musician. Because stiffness and rigidity are our enemies.
Absolutely. I love the scaffold like metaphor that you gave, because it's really like a mindset, right? Because you can feel yourself connecting to the ground even if you're not. Yep.
Yeah. So another way to think about it is that if you've ever been on an elevator in a multi-story building, you have that, when you go up really fast, you feel like drawn to the ground. You can really feel that, your feet on the ground. And then when you go down really fast, you feel very light. So the way our bodies actually are designed to feel, and this is what little kids have, is to have that combination of that really stuck to the ground and buoyant and light inside. Combination of the up and the down at the same time. That's what little kids have.
It's hard to achieve.
It isn't really, because it's natural. You just have to let go of all the crap you've been doing to get in the way of it.
Well, that's the thing. We spent so long.
Right.
Deviating.
And that's why the awareness is so important, because if you're not learning to be aware of what your body feels like and what you're doing, then you can't make those changes.
Absolutely.
You know, and I watched I have a almost 3-year-old grandson. This guy is so strong. He can climb anything that he wants, and you have to watch him every second because he'd be climbing up on the top of cabinets and probably jumping off. But it's not strength like you would get from being at the gym. You know, it's complete coordination. And when I would watch him, you know, when he was at the stage of pulling up, what we call pulling up, he wasn't using his hands to pull himself up like this to stand. It was all coming from the floor, all coming from his legs and his feet. And it was beautiful. It's so beautiful to watch. And you can even watch movies of babies learning to walk and crawl. It's wonderful to have those images in our minds because they can help change our body maps.
Absolutely. It's amazing how much the mind can influence what we do with our bodies.
Oh, yeah. And now that we understand about plasticity of the mind, of the brain, we know that we can do anything.
Yeah, it's a quite exciting place to be in.
Yeah, it is. And what's really interesting about body mapping is that they know that it works, but the neuroscientists haven't quite figured out what those maps actually are. It's not like one place in your brain you have a map of your arm. It's a combination of multi-sensory and spatial maps. So it's a combination of movement, sensory, spatial, kinesthetic awareness, you know, sensors in the joints and connective tissue and fascia, and all, you know, fascia has like its own brain, and all of that stuff is working together. And it's not like something you can see on an MRI as one thing. So they're still figuring it out, but it clearly works. I can tell you how many people, like I do when I go to conferences, like I go to the National Flute Convention every year, except this year we're not having one, and I have a booth and I work with people. I offer 10-minute mini lessons. So somebody comes up to me and says, oh, my wrist is really hurting when I play. Can you help me? Because my booth says music minus pain. That's the name of my company. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, let's find out what's going on. And in 10 minutes, we've solved what's going on with their wrist. And it's almost never the wrist. It's almost always something that's going on up here, or how they're standing, or extra tension, or that they're gripping their instrument, or, you know, so there's all, the symptom is very rarely the cause. And so I can help them figure that out. And so that the map changing can be really quick. Or somebody who is really having a lot of neck tension, and you ask them, where do you think your head is attached to your spine? And they'll point back here somewhere. So they're always moving their head from there. So it creates this 12-pound, now 24 pounds, every time it goes forward an inch, it doubles in weight. This huge weight is straining their neck muscles and jamming their arm structure down onto their ribs and limiting their breathing and pressing on the nerves to their hands. There's a whole global effect of that, which has nothing to do with, oh, your head is forward, you should pick it up and stand up straight, which is mostly what a teacher will say. Bring your head back, bring your head back, bring your head back. It's not working. Something going on, something else going on there, usually a body mapping thing. So then they have to go home and practice it. You can change the map really quickly, but the change isn't permanent until you've done it for a few weeks. It's like any habit. It's changing habits of thought, habits of movement.
Exactly. You talked about your company and the same name for the website, correct?
Yeah, music-pain.com. Yep.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about the website and what you have to offer on there and the resources available?
Yeah, I have an article on, I think it's called Safeguarding Your Hands, which talks a lot about what's going on in your hands and a lot of things that we have just talked about. I used to have tons and tons of articles on there, but I took most of them down because I didn't have permission to use the pictures in the article. They were drawn, the images were drawn by somebody else. They were their intellectual property. So mostly I use my website to just help people get connected with me. It's a beginning step And then what I love to do is connect with people on Facebook. I have over 100 videos on Facebook. I finally had somebody make a list of them for me, and I was like, wow, these are a lot of great videos.
Wow.
So I did for about 3 years, I did one every week. And there's a whole series on breathing. I'm in the process of making them more available to people. But so that's a really great resource. And then I also connect with people. I have a free Facebook group called Born Free, Playing Freer. And I invite people who are interested in this kind of work to join me there. And we have fun sharing videos and questions and comments. You know, just people who are interested in learning more about how the body works for musicians.
Wonderful. And you kind of just answered this question, but if people want to contact you, it would be through your website or through Facebook.
Yeah, or my email, which is just my name, Lea Pearson at mac.com, M-A-C.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I've learned a lot, so I'm really excited to share this with a bunch of other people.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Thomas. It was so great to talk with you. I love your ideas. I love what you're doing with this podcast. It's fantastic. So I look forward to spreading it and to talking with you again sometime. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all for checking out this podcast/video series. If you have any questions or topics that you might want to be discussed, you can contact me on social media or thomaskurtzmusic@gmail.com. Have a great day.
So what we were talking about really was hip joints and the importance of feeling our hip joints. So I want to show you a way to find your hip joints. And if you're not sure, actually a great thing is to try and draw them. See if you can figure out what they actually look like. But go ahead and stand up for a minute and see if you can find, I'm going to push my chair away here for a second. See if you can figure out where your hip joints are. A lot of people think they're up here, some people here, some people down here. But really, the best way to find them is how you sit down. So if you get in front of your chair and just go sit down on the chair. Okay? Then stand up. Then sit down again. Then stand up again. Then sit halfway down. And when you get halfway down, you're going to be bending right at the hip joints here. Let me see if I can tilt my screen a little bit more. Yep. Okay, you're going to be bending right here at your hip joints. It's right kind of where the crease is, right there. And now, if you go into this, it's sort of a partial squat. It's more like a lunge way of moving. You can lunge this way, that way. Now you find that your whole torso is open, especially the bottom. All through here is much more open so that you can breathe more freely. So that's fantastic. Yeah. So what do the hip joints actually look like? Well, this is really useful to show that, you know, in your body, the sit bones are what you sit on. But if you look, the hip joints are actually higher, a couple inches higher than your sit bones. And they bend all around. They can move in incredible ways. This is what you see gymnasts do. So there's a lot of movement there. What some of us do is we tend to sit back on our tailbone, which is not going to help us balance, or we tend to sit up straight, arching the back, and then we're sitting on our legs. And I'm going to actually show you with Captain Bob here. He's my guy, and I'll bring I don't need my chair yet. Okay. So when he's sitting, if he's sitting back on his tailbone, it's going to make him slump way over, and then his tailbone and his sit bones end up being sort of in a triangle like that. When he tries to sit up straight, he's going to arch his back, and now the weight of his head and torso is going to be way over his lower back, which is not going to give him much support at all. So when he's sitting directly on his sit bones like this, then it's a much better balance and the whole body can be freer because he's not using muscles to keep himself from falling over. It's great. So the last thing I want to show you today is just this simple little etude called jumping jacks. And I want you to try this. So just notice how you're standing, notice how you're breathing, notice how you feel. And now we're going to do 10 jumping jacks. Are you ready? Here we go. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Great. Now just stand there and notice how you feel. Do you feel a little more buoyant, a little more upright, a little easier to breathe? Maybe your arms feel a little easier. If you play right now, pick up your instrument and play right now, I bet you it's going to feel different. What this does for you is it helps get you that connection to the floor and that support and buoyancy and resilience from the floor, which is where you're really being held up from. So I really invite you to do that, to play, then do 10 jumping jacks, and then play right away again and see what feels different for you. So I hope this is helpful. Enjoy this. If you want to connect with me, again, find me on Facebook, Lea Pearson in Massachusetts, and I hope to see you. Thank you so much.